You get used to it. We are currently members of the Ames Church. We started visiting all of you when you were in the Ames Fellowship Church. Is that what it was? We really liked all of your company. Probably the biggest draw for us to come here was your children's program. Ames is a much smaller church and doesn't have a lot to offer for a children's program, and you guys are very child-oriented here, very kid-friendly. Not that Ames wasn't kid-friendly, they love children, but with having so many more children and so many more teachers here, it gives our children some opportunity to experience church with other kids. It's something they haven't had much of throughout their lives. Our son Dylan, the one in the red, he's been in the church most of his life and has never had anyone his own age. So having kids his own age is a large benefit for us. And then our other two children that are here, Chelsea and Jonathan, have kids close to their age here too, and they both haven't had that in the past. And then my wife Amanda, she loves kids too, and she's helping out in the Sabbath school class. We have asked for a membership transfer, so hopefully all of you will accept that, and we'll become members here soon. But I would like to let you know that when we left Ames, we didn't leave there with any issues or any hard feelings. We didn't leave Ames because there was something bad happening. There wasn't anything bad going on. We love our Ames family very much, and we hope to stay very well connected with them because they are family. And of course, we're hoping to become very well connected with all of you and become a part of your family. And all of you have done a very good job so far of welcoming us in as a part of your family. We've been to several of your homes already. I think the first week we visited the fellowship, Michael Riddle nabbed us up and spent an entire day and evening and almost all night with his family and taking us around to other families. And then there's been other families here that has invited us over. So you guys do a really good job of welcoming new people in, and it's really nice to see that. Before I gab all day, I should probably get started. Let's start by looking at Luke chapter 8, verse 40. Luke chapter 8, verse 40. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer before we begin. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I pray that as I deliver this message, Lord, that I am able to speak clear enough for others to understand. Lord, I pray that I don't stutter excessively and that the words I speak make sense to those who are listening. Lord, I pray that the words I speak are your words. Lord, I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Luke chapter 8, verse 40. So it was, when Jesus returned, that the multitude welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue. And he fell down at Jesus' feet and begged him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. But as he went, the multitudes thronged him. Now a woman, having a flow of blood for 12 years, who had spent all her livelihood on physicians and could not be healed by any, came from behind and touched the border of his garment, and immediately the flow of blood stopped. And Jesus said, "Who touched me?" When all denied, Peter and those with him said, "Master, the multitude throngs and presses you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus said, "Somebody touched me, for I perceived power going out from me." Now, when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling, and falling down before him, she declared to him in the presence of all the people the reason she had touched him, and how she was healed immediately. And he said to her, "Daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While he was still speaking, someone came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying to him, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher." But when Jesus heard it, he answered him, saying, "Do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be made well." When he came into the house, he permitted no one to go in, except for Peter, James, and John, and the father and the mother of the girl. But he said, Now all wept and mourned for her. But he said, "Do not weep. She is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him, knowing that she was dead. But he put them all outside, took her by the hand, and called, saying, "Little girl, arise." Then her spirit returned, and she rose immediately. And he commanded that she be given something to eat. Listed in the Bible are 35 miracles that Jesus performed. 35. Out of those 35 miracles, 23 were healings. 3 he raised from the dead. 2 were about fish. He calmed the storm. He walked on water. He cursed a fig tree. And he even provided tax money through a fish. Now we've been told and we've read that if everything that Jesus done was written down, it would take up all the libraries in the world. So we know there are much, much more miracles that were performed by Jesus. But next I want to tell you about a miracle that's not in the Bible. It's about a boy from Africa who was about 8 years old, and he got really sick. He got really sick, and his mother took him to the hospital because she feared that he wasn't going to make it. So she took him to the hospital, and the doctor looked at him and told her that he had tuberculosis and asthma and all kinds of infection, and that there wasn't anything they could do. So she told the mother to take the boy home. There wasn't anything he could do. On the way home, the boy died. Now, in this part of Africa, it's considered taboo to bury a child or bury anyone on Friday. So, since it was Friday, they laid the boy on a rug and left him there and mourned for him for the day. They mourned for him all day. And the next day came, and someone had decided to call an evangelist. Now, it's Africa, so there are usually people around, church people. Evangelists like to go to Africa. It's a popular country, a popular destination. So this group decided to call an evangelist that was nearby. So they called the evangelist. The evangelist shows up and looks at the boy, sees him on the ground. Everyone mourning, everyone crying for the young child. And he tells them that he is going to pray to God and that God is going to raise this boy from the dead. So that's what he does. He starts praying for the boy. This evangelist was sponsored by the Christian Broadcasting Network, so they decided to show some videos too. So they showed videos of different speakers, different preachers, different teachers on the TV while praying for this boy. And the moment when the evangelist on the TV starts talking about praying for miracles, the boy wakes up. It's been 24 hours, a little over 24 hours, and the boy wakes up. Everyone's amazed. The child raised from the dead. Later, they go and talk to the mother, and the mother tells her story, or tells the story, and talks about how all these people in the village have been converted to Christianity now because this boy was raised from the dead. Even the doctor, who wasn't a Christian before, is now a Christian because this boy was raised from the dead. We're talking about miracles a little bit, and the first two we talked about were in the Bible, right? The first one was actually kind of in the middle of another one. The one about the flow of blood, and then the one about the girl raised from the dead. before we get too much farther, what's a miracle? Can anyone answer that for me? What is a miracle? Something that happens that's impossible to happen. Any other thoughts on what a miracle is? Anyone? Something supernatural? Did you have something? There you go. Would we agree that that's a pretty good definition of what we believe a miracle is? Something that's supernatural, something that just is impossible to happen, something that breaks the laws as we know, breaks the laws of science. Is that a decent example of a miracle? Do you think all of the miracles I told you about today so far are miracles? Do they sound like miracles? I think they are, because they can't be explained. I'm going to finish the story about the boy from Africa, because later he talks about his trip to heaven, about his adventure of playing soccer. And while he was playing soccer, he scores a goal, and then the people around him tell him it's time to go back. Now, reading the Bible, reading things that Ellen White says, I don't remember any specific stories talking about children being in heaven yet. I do remember Ellen White talking rather vividly about how difficult it was to leave, about not wanting to leave because of how beautiful heaven was, how glorious it was. See, I think all three of these things are miracles simply because it's a supernatural event that can't be explained by laws of science, by what we interpret laws of science to be. So it's a miracle. It's miraculous. It's amazing. But I'm not sure it's from God. The first two, obviously, because we read about them in the Bible, but the third one I told you about, the one about the boy from Africa, I'm not sure that one's from God. But it's hard to tell, isn't it? Can you understand what I'm saying? It's difficult to tell sometimes where it comes from. Let's look at Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12, verse 38. We're going to go back talking about miracles a little bit, or keep talking about miracles a little bit, because we're infatuated with them. We're mesmerized by them. You start talking about miracles, people listen. It's exciting. It's interesting. Maybe part of it is because we don't understand how it works or why it works. Verse 38 reads, "Then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered, saying, 'Teacher, we want to see a sign from you.' But he answered and said to them, 'An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth.'" Could you consider a miracle to be a sign? Isn't that what a miracle is? Aren't signs miracles? They're unexplained. You look at the Bible dictionary and they're hand in hand, miracles and signs. But we like to look for miracles, don't we? I'm going somewhere with this, so don't worry. Let's look at Luke chapter 23, verse 6. When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked if the man were a Galilean. We're talking about Jesus. "And as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod who was also in Jerusalem at the time. Now when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard many things about him, and he had hoped to see some miracles done by him. Was Herod a godly man? Wasn't Herod a wicked man? Verse 9, then he questioned him with many words, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him, arraying him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate. Why did Herod want to see his miracles? He wanted a show. He wanted to be excited. He wanted to be entertained. Herod wanted to see Jesus' miracles not because he believed in Jesus, not because he had faith in Jesus of any kind. He wanted to see his miracles because he wanted entertainment. It was intriguing. It was interesting. Let's go to John chapter 6, verse 28. John chapter 6, verse 28. Then they said to him, "What shall we do that we may work the works of God?" Jesus answered and said to them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he sent. Therefore he said to him, 'What sign will you perform then, that we may see it and believe you? What work will you do? Our fathers ate the manna in the desert. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat.' Then Jesus said to them, 'Most assuredly I say to you, Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world.' Then they said to him, 'Lord, give us this bread always.' And Jesus said to them, 'I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger. He who believes in me shall never thirst. But I said to you that you have seen me and yet do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will by no means cast out. For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is the will of my Father who sent me, that of all he has given me, I should lose nothing, but should raise it up again at the last day.'" Usually Jesus was surrounded by people wanting to listen to him, people wanting to believe in him, people that did believe in him, and those just looking for a show, looking for the spectacle. These people were next to Jesus, right near him, and most of them didn't know who he was. He performed miracles right in front of them. I mean, some of the miracles he had performed prior to that was he had walked on the sea. He had fed 5,000. He had healed the man by the pool of Bethsaida. He had done many miracles already in front of these people. But they didn't know who he was. They didn't have faith in him. They had faith in his miracles. They had faith in his signs. But what I want to say is having faith in the miracles is dangerous. Jesus isn't the only one that can perform miracles. God isn't the only one that can perform miracles. Matthew chapter 7, verse 15. Matthew chapter 7, verse 15. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits you will know them. Are there false prophets today? Of course there are. Verse 21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Now, I know many of us have heard these verses before. But what I'm trying to point out is these people didn't know Jesus, but yet they still performed miracles. They didn't know Jesus, but they still prophesied in His name. They didn't know Jesus, but they still cast out demons in His name. They didn't know Jesus, but they done so many miracles in His name. How is that? They had to have known about Him, right? But they practice lawlessness. Those are people who, one example of that would be someone who believes in Jesus, but also believes they don't need to change. That they don't need to follow His commandments. That they don't need to follow His laws. Those who practice lawlessness. Let's look at 24, Matthew 24. Matthew 24, 21. Matthew chapter 24, verse 21. We know Jesus performs miracles. There's 35 examples in the New Testament of Jesus performing miracles. But there's also examples of Satan's miracles, of the deceiver performing miracles. Verse 21. For then there will be a great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until the time, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out. Or look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. So it says there will be more miracles at the end, right? But we'll know which ones are false and which ones are from God, won't we? It's right here. I mean, I'm looking at it black and white. I mean, it should be pretty easy to tell. Shouldn't it? But it's not. I kind of used my daughter as a guinea pig the other day to test a little theory. We were talking about this subject, And she was having questions about the elect. Her question was, how are we supposed to stand up against this when the smartest people out there could be deceived? What's my hope? How am I going to do that? Well, part of the answer to that is our love for Jesus and our faith. But there's more than just that. We have to study. But we have to study for ourselves. I asked her the question, what if I told you everything I had taught you was wrong? What if I told you the stuff we believe in the Bible is wrong? It was misinterpreted. The people that wrote that part got it wrong, and they rewrote it. The people that wrote the King James Version of the Bible were wrong, and so they're rewriting it right now because they figured it out. They figured out a phrase, and it's wrong. Would you believe me? She wanted to say no. She did. She wanted to say no. But the answer was yes. She would have believed me. Now, some of that is she has trust for me because I'm her father. But don't we listen to other people other than our parents? Don't we listen to the people standing up here? Do we always fact check? Are all of you going to go home tonight or after Sabbath and go through everything I just said and make sure it was true? I used to hear stories of Adventists giving sermons, standing up here, and someone says something wrong, and all of a sudden you see a half a dozen elders stand up because you made a mistake. You said something that wasn't true. And those elders didn't want to take the chance that someone in the audience didn't catch it and thought it was true. So they would stand up, stop a sermon to clarify if there was a mistake made. We don't do that anymore. Part of it's probably because otherwise you wouldn't get lay people up here preaching because they're really afraid of making mistakes. That's one of my fears, is that I say something that isn't true. But if we listen to the people up here, if we listen to Doug Batchelor, if we listen to all of those other Adventist preachers and we don't fact check, if we don't research for ourselves what they're saying, then we don't know if they're deceiving us. We can't be saved through what Doug Batchelor says. We can't be saved through what David Lincoln says. We can't be saved through what Pastor Joshua says. We have to study it for ourselves. Because otherwise, when stuff starts changing, when laws start changing, and we start having questions, we're going to go back to those same people we've always learned from. And what if they're a sheep? Or a wolf, I'm sorry. Hopefully they're sheep. What if they're a wolf in sheep's clothing? We don't know that. Let's look at Revelation chapter 13. Let's start with verse 11. Revelation chapter 13, verse 11. Now, I was going to read from 1 Kings a little bit, but in the interest of time, I'll kind of give you the rundown on what's happening. So this would be a good time for you to make a mental note of what I'm talking about, so later you can fact check, because I'm not even going to have this text up on the screen. Are most of you familiar with the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal? Does that sound familiar? Elijah was the last prophet of God. He was sent by God to give an example, to perform a miracle, to give God an opportunity to prove who he was through a miracle. So Elijah meets up with the prophets of Baal, 450 of them, I believe, and they go through a little test. Elijah says, you take a bull, I'll take a bull. We'll both offer our bulls to our gods, and whoever proves himself wins. So what they were doing is they both built altars. They put their sacrifice on the altar, And the prophets of Baal went first. And they were tasked with having their God bring fire from heaven and light the altar. So from morning until noon, the prophets of Baal prayed and prophesied for this God of theirs to come down and start the fire for them. That's all they had to do, was just one little spark and start the wood on fire, and that was it. Noon comes, and nothing has happened yet. So then Elijah decides to start mocking them a little bit. Hey, he's a god. Maybe he's busy. Maybe you should yell louder so he can hear you. He's a god. Maybe he's traveling. Keep yelling. Maybe he's sleeping. Maybe you have to wake him up. So the prophets of Baal continued to yell louder and to dance around. And they even started to cut themselves to try to get their God's attention. Almost the entire day goes by and no fire for Baal or from Baal. So the time gets close to the evening for the evening sacrifice. Elijah decides it's his turn. He has the people come together. They gather around the altar. They dig a trench around it. And then they bring water. They pour so much water over the top of the altar that it fills the trench below. And then Elijah calls on God and asks God to bring fire. And he does. Not only does it burn up the offering, it burns up the wood, it burns up the dust, and it even dries up all of the water all the way around it. So there's a good example of a miracle of God proving he's God. He was proving that to the other people, to the prophets of Baal, wasn't he? But if you look in Revelation chapter 13, verse 11. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men. In Elijah's day, God performed a miracle to prove he was God. Satan is going to perform many miracles, just like the ones God performed, just like the ones Jesus performed, with the purpose of deceiving us. That's the whole goal, is to deceive us. Are we smarter than Satan? Not even close. Our only hope is through Jesus. We have to love him, we have to obey him, and we have to learn about him. How can you love someone you don't know? Can you love someone you don't know? You can say you do. I'm sorry, I love you. But I have no clue. I love you. Does that mean anything? Not really. It's a little awkward, but it doesn't mean anything because I don't know who you are. You can't love Jesus if you don't know who he is. You can't love God without a relationship. Without that relationship, you're going to be one of those people. Hopefully, we won't. But we could be one of those people standing around in awe when fire comes from heaven and all those people are deceived. Let's look at Revelation chapter 1. Chapter 1, verse 13 and 15. I'll get there eventually. I could just read it from up there, right? You know what? That was the wrong verse. That's all right. We could do something different for like 2 minutes. What's it going to look like when Jesus returns? We all should know this one pretty good, right? Any volunteers for a statement? What's the return of Jesus going to look like?
Amazing.
Amazing? I'm looking for details, not emotions, but thank you. Bright, that's a good one. That's a good detail. From the east to the west. Never touches the ground. Do you know you look that up on the internet and you will find people who say he does. It's not true, but you will. Any other?
He'll be surrounded by angels.
Be surrounded by angels.
The dead in Christ is
The dead in Christ raised first.
Every eye shall see him.
Every eye shall see him. I'm sorry? The trumpets. The trumpets will sound. Any more? Why is that important?
There will be no deception.
There will be no deception. Why?
Satan will try to counterfeit.
He'll try, but that's the one thing he cannot counterfeit. God will not allow him to counterfeit the return of Jesus. So when Satan, Lucifer, the master deceiver, returns, we will hear of him on earth. It won't be east to west. It won't be every eye will see. It will be, hey, Jesus is over there. Hey, Jesus is over there. It's important to know how he returns because that's the one thing God will not allow him to mimic, is his return. His glorious, triumphant, amazing return. Our closing hymn.